Good morning on this beautiful Sunday, the 13th of June, and welcome to today's service of the North Chapel Unitarian Universalist Society of Woodstock, Vermont. My name is Richard Waddell, and I'm happy to be here with you. Today's reflection will be given by the Reverend Gwen Groff, and we're happy to have her back with us. Gwen grew up in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and received her Master of Divinity degree from the Lancaster Theological Seminary. She has been the minister at Bethany Mennonite Church in Bridgewater Corners, Vermont, for the past 21 years. All of us at the North Chapel are so looking forward to the time when we can meet together again in person, and that time is coming very soon. The first of our outdoor worship services on the back lawn is scheduled for Sunday, July 11th. Please plan to join us there. More details on the service can be found at our website. Also, I would like to remind you that every Wednesday at noon, there's a brown bag lunch sponsored by the Reopening Task Force. Please join us and bring your own chair. The opening words are by Mr. Rogers. God's nature has grown and grown and grown all through the ages. Yet at the heart of the original creation is that word. Call it love, call it grace, call it peace. That essence which is lodged somewhere within each of us that longs for ultimate expression. If we choose to allow it to grow, we'll be given help. If we choose otherwise, we won't be forced. If there is such a thing as a dark corner of God's nature, then I think it's God's refusal to go back on the promise of the creation's freedom to love or not. Please join us in the singing of our hymn this morning, Comfort Ye.
Hello, my name is Laura Foley, and I'm speaking to you today not from Pomfret, Vermont. In fact, not from Vermont at all, but over here right outside of Camden, Maine. And we're visiting my son, his wife, and their 4 3/4-year-old daughter, Evelyn. I wanted to read you 2 poems which are about her and about being with her. This is called Camden, Maine. The winter loons find harbor here, as do I, my child's child, walking slowly with me down the street, her tiny hand like an anchor in mine. She bids hello to water, to sunlight on the water, to the river beneath the little bridge, to the strange man passing, who stops and waves, basking in her favor. No one racing this quiet Sunday morning, except time's thoroughbred waters galloping to the sea. Everything we need. I take my granddaughter to the beach, a frigid Maine inlet, but it's hot enough this summer day that the cold, dark, deep will feel tingly good against skin. Dipping one sandaled toe in, she exclaims to gulls, to the sea, and to me, to 12 bored geese floating offshore, "I'm swimming!" I quibble, "Not exactly, dear." Acclimating, she wades in ankle deep, swirls hands in the gray-green surface of everything we need to survive. "Look, I'm swimming like a butterfly." "Yes, darling," I surrender, then swing her as she giggles, kicking legs, making a foaming white wake as we engine through the sea together.
It is so good to be with you today. I was daunted by the theme of this month's reflections, healing the world, the whole world. And then I focused on one sentence within the theme. How do we stay in conversation with people of different perspectives? Staying in conversation across deep divides while masked and distanced and often only virtually present has been one of the biggest challenges of the pandemic. I have been so grateful for the things that have enabled remote conversations. I've appreciated your side of this conversation, these recorded North Chapel services that I've been able to watch for the past year and a half. I know virtual church has its limitations, but you have managed to make these recordings a space for spiritual encounter, for contemplation and learning, for heart opening and healing. I've been a regular watcher, and this morning I get to participate in the other side of the conversation. Something that one of you said to me several years ago when I worked in the North Chapel Pastoral Care Office came to mind as I was thinking about this theme. I remember you asked the question, how do we change the world? It wasn't rhetorical, but it also wasn't asked from a place of deep despair. It was put out like a thought experiment. This was pre-COVID, of course. The question wasn't about a worldwide pandemic. The context was our divided political reality. Threats to our democracy that had previously seemed unthinkable. A growing ecological crisis and increasing acts of racist violence. The world seemed at risk. And you said, how do we change this? And I think I tossed the question back to you. That's my superpower. I said, what do you think we can do to change the world? And you said, we can do the things that we're good at. The thing that brings us joy. The thing that the world needs from us. We do that and we do it better. Not we do it more, that's exhausting and anxiety producing, but we do it better and better. And we join with other people doing what brings them joy, whatever they do well. I still think that is a brilliant answer. Do what you're good at, and it ripples out to heal the whole world. What you were describing, of course, is the butterfly effect. The piece of chaos theory that says a tiny change in wind currents caused by the flapping of a butterfly's wing can, weeks later, halfway around the world, cause a tornado, divert its path. Little things growing into big effects. The butterfly obviously doesn't know its effect, but we can imagine which of our wing beats will have a good effect and decide to do it better, more intentionally, more creatively. When I tune into the recordings of North Chapel services and I see people doing their piece that they're good at with such thoughtfulness and generosity, through all the seasons, I see Laura sitting with her dogs on a hill in Pomfret and hear her reading a poem, that week's new offering, which makes us look more closely, be more present, feel more grounded, and sense more connection. A poem may be a small flap of a pair of wings, but she does it week after week, and we all experience it, and we are all shifted just a bit as a result of that. The individual act becomes part of the collective. And I sense that with all of the pieces of the services, with the singing and the instrumental music, the reflections, the flowers on the altar behind Leon, the recorded images, and the sounds of streams and birds and storms. And I see it in Diane's invisible hand weaving it all together. And it's not just on the Sunday morning services, it's in your arts corner. It's in your group conversations happening remotely or now outdoors. It's in the public actions on the green. That's how we change the world for the better, by offering what we're good at and getting better at it. This got me thinking about the little wing beats that cause the tornadoes, the bad ones. I'm aware of some things that I do that do not contribute to the healing of the world. I'm thinking of my little wing beats that are my small contributions to the gale force winds that divide us rather than connect us. I'm thinking, just for example, about an email conversation with my sister. Isn't it often our own family members who know where the buttons are? And isn't it often on email or through texts? When we aren't face to face, it's so much easier to forget our common humanity. My sister and I have quite different views politically, theologically. We usually try to avoid our areas of deep division. I thought we did that pretty well during the election season. When we did talk politics, we tried to listen to understand, not to convince. But the pandemic has meant that we had to talk about differences in what we believe about hydroxychloroquine, which makes a difference in what we choose to do about vaccines for ourselves and for our 94-year-old mother. These conversations can't be avoided or skirted. Mother lives in a retirement community near where my sister lives in Pennsylvania. I'm 8 hours away here in Vermont. As the vaccine was becoming available for the residents, it would fall to my sister to support our mother in making decisions, in scheduling, in getting an appointment. My sister and I discussed our different beliefs about the vaccine, how quickly and unhelpfully our email conflict escalated, and so predictably. At one point I wrote, "Did you see that your doctor, whose advice you follow about vaccines, got arrested at the Capitol on the 6th? She replied that she wasn't aware of her doctor's politics, only her science. The conversation continued to deteriorate. All my work on bridge building and nonviolent communication evaporated. I wrote, "Do you not care that more than 500,000 people in this country have died?" And she replied with, "Do you not care about how many unborn babies have been aborted?" And I thought, that's it, we're done. Last month on the car radio, I heard an episode of On Point about high conflict that stuck with me. High conflict is what I think my sister and I slid into, or rose into. High conflict is not good conflict. Good conflict is constructive. It makes us learn from the other and expand our worldview and grow as human beings. High conflict makes us miserable and stuck. Amanda Ripley, the author of the book on high conflict, who was being interviewed, says that people drawn into high conflict become certain of their own righteousness. They make negative assumptions of those who have a different position. They begin to frame their world in terms of us versus them. Every attempt to tame the conflict just makes it worse. After a while, people locked in high conflict begin to mimic the behavior of their adversaries, usually without realizing it. Everything she described sounded so familiar. This was my sister and me. This is our world, so in need of healing. There's one story from that On Being program about high conflict that really intrigued me. It was from a long time ago, but because of the recent Gaza conflict, it seems very relevant today. News analyst Jack Beatty told the story of the Camp David peace talks between Israel and Egypt. In 1978, President Jimmy Carter invited Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin and Egyptian President Anwar Sadat to Camp David to try to end the 30-year conflict between Israel and Egypt. Beatty reminded listeners of the identities of the cast of characters who were meeting at Camp David. Jimmy Carter was a deeply unpopular American president by that point. Anwar Sadat today may be remembered as some kind of noble visionary, but in his youth, he was an assassin in the Egyptian army. And Menachem Begin had been a terrorist leader. His identity was that of a warrior. In Begin's autobiography, he called himself a new species of human being, the fighting Jew. He had fought against the Poles, he said, fought against the Nazis, fought against the British, fought against the Arabs. He had made a promise to God that he would never dismantle a Jewish settlement. And there were Israeli settlements on Egyptian land. Begin could not compromise. Those were the players at Camp David. Two heads of state who identified as warriors and one weak mediator had come together to try to make peace in the Middle East. At one point, early on, Sadat and Begin had actually started a fist fight, and Carter decided that they couldn't be in the same room together. Carter said after the first 3 days, Begin stayed in his cabin, Sadat stayed in his cabin, except when they went out to get food, and I went back and forth between the two of them. So when Begin was sleeping, I was meeting with Sadat. While Sadat was sleeping, I would meet with Begin, and I didn't get much sleep for 10 days. By the 13th day of the talks, everything had broken down. With negotiations at a deadlock, the leaders prepared to leave. It was then that a tiny flap of a butterfly caused a small change in the air currents. Carter recalled, "We had a photograph made of me and Begin and Sadat together. And Begin asked me if I would autograph the photographs for his 8 grandchildren. And so my secretary, without my knowing, called Israel and found out the names of every one of Begin's grandchildren. Instead of just saying, 'Best wishes, Jimmy Carter,' I put, 'With love and best wishes to,' and I put down the names of every one of his grandchildren." Carter recalls, "I took the stack of photographs over and gave it to Begin. And he was very angry with me at that time because he thought that we had failed to carry out what Israel wanted. When I went in, I handed him the photographs that I had autographed. Carter said, 'I brought you the photographs that you asked for.' And Begin replied coolly, 'Thank you, Mr. President.' Begin turned to walk away, and then he noticed that Carter had signed them to Ayelet, to Osnat. Begin read the names aloud and began weeping openly. To Oret, to Mariav, to Michael. Carter also wept. He said to Begin, 'I wanted to be able to say, this is when your grandfather and I brought peace to the Middle East.' And Begin turned around and said, 'Why don't we try one more time?' The 3 heads of state stayed in the conversation and began negotiating as human beings. President Carter added, 'After we agreed to stay, somebody told me that Begin had visited Sadat's cabin, and I was very worried about that because I was afraid that they'd get into another punching match. But when I went over there, they were hugging each other.' What happened in that encounter? What softened Begin's heart? Why did the names of his grandchildren make him turn around? Beatty says it was because the photographs were igniting a deeper identity in Begin, the identity of grandfather. This glimpse of the peace that could have been for his own grandchildren allowed Begin to step away from his identity of warrior and embody his identity of grandfather, a role he already had but was not identifying with at Camp David. In situations of high conflict, it is almost impossible to get someone to abandon their conflict identity. But if you can ignite a different identity, an identity that already exists outside the conflict, you may be able to meet there. Those understory identities are there all along, but we forget them in high conflict. The work of healing the world is sometimes the work of reminding, of remembering, and inhabiting those deeper identities. That's what eventually got my sister and me out of our stuck conflict. She will likely never abandon her conflict identity of conservative, and I won't abandon mine of progressive. But we were able to find our common identity outside the conflict and meet as daughters of the same mother. Then we could have a real conversation about reasonable things to do about our mother. Something helpful happens when we can take one step back and say, what are we actually doing? What are we already doing? And what do we want to do better? My sister and I shifted to looking at what we're doing instead of our differences in what we believe. My sister is faithfully visiting our mother, safely driving her to the grocery store, respectfully helping her try to figure out her cell phone, and lovingly going through photos that evoke long ago memories. And despite my sister's strong convictions to the contrary, she is helping our mother sign up for a vaccine that Mom has decided she wants. This is what healing the world looks like, at least this week. It's messy, it's ongoing. It is staying in the conversations that get good things done and getting out of the stuck conflicts that add to the world's tornadoes.
We are passing this world on to our kids. From the moment they climb out of their cribs, and we try to teach them well, let them know that they're loved, but in the end all we can do is hope our best is good enough. And they'll witness how this life can be so beautiful and cruel. And we can't shelter them forever, but we can show them some of the tools. And they might leave this world in a little better shape than me and you. We are only passing through. Passing through, passing through, passing through, passing through. We are only passing through, passing through, passing through, passing through. We are only passing through. And we've been watching this world from our living rooms. It's more than 50 years since we walked on the moon. And this big blue ball keeps shrinking. I'm not sure if that's good, but for better or for worse, this whole world's our neighborhood. And there's no place left to run where we can get above the fray. No, we all need to learn to get along and not just to get our way. Not only for each other, but for our children's children too. We are only passing through. Passing through, passing through, passing through, passing through. passing through, passing through,
passing through,
passing through. We are only passing through. And sometimes I wonder, what will I pass on? How much can one voice do with just a song? Sometimes injustice and indifference are the only things I see, but I refuse to let my hope become the latest casualty. So I'll sing of love and truth. I'll try to practice what I preach. And if I can't change the world, I'll change the world within my reach. And what better place to start than here and now with me and you? We are only passing through, passing through, passing through. We are only passing through, passing through, passing through. We are only passing through. We are only passing through.